At my wedding party, my family called me the cheap one for not paying for their flights. Last month, when I bought a vineyard, my husband asked, should we invite the budget experts? It started with the wedding. It wasn't a big affair. Heck, it wasn't even close. After my divorce from Richard, I wanted a fresh start. It wasn't just about moving on from a man who hadn't loved me in years, it was about reclaiming who I was. I'd spent so many years trying to please everyone, my family, my ex, society's expectations, and it had left me drained, hollow in places I didn't even know existed. So when Chris came into my life, everything felt easier. There was no pressure, no grand gestures. We just enjoyed being around each other. When he proposed, I wasn't thrilled at first. I had a hard time imagining another wedding after everything that happened with Richard. But Chris reassured me. We can make it ours, he said. He didn't want a big wedding. No castle, no over-the-top venue, no ridiculous budget. He just wanted something simple. Something real. So, we decided to get married at the vineyard I had been slowly building after my aunt passed away. It was a modest place, tucked away in the rolling hills of Napa Valley. The vines were just beginning to thrive, and the weather was perfect for an intimate ceremony. We kept the guest list small, close family, a few friends, and a handful of people who actually mattered. But then, the emails came in. From my parents. From my brother. From my sister. They all wanted more. We'll pay for our flights, but you really should be covering it, Olivia, my mother had said, almost accusingly. It's your wedding, after all. It's not like you're struggling financially. I could feel the judgment in her tone. She didn't get it. She thought weddings were about how much you could spend, how many people you could impress, how many times you could flaunt your wealth. And Mark, my older brother, couldn't even hide his irritation when I told him my plans. Seriously, Liv? A vineyard wedding? Who do you think you're fooling? His words were sharp, even though he tried to disguise them with a smile. Why don't you just do something simple, something classy? It didn't take long for me to realize that they didn't care about the wedding. They cared about the spectacle. They wanted a show, a performance. But that wasn't what I wanted. I just wanted to marry the man I loved, in a place that felt like home. I refused. I refused to pay for their flights. I refused to bow to the pressure. And when the wedding finally happened, it was beautiful. It was perfect, in the way that only small, simple moments can be. The vineyard was alive with color. The air was warm but not stifling. There was laughter, and love, and good wine. But as the day wore on, I started to feel the tension from my family. My mother was cold. Mark was aloof. And Rebecca, my younger sister, kept giving me these little looks that said she didn't understand why I didn't want more. The comments were subtle at first, but they stung nonetheless. Olivia, my mother whispered, as I was greeting some of the guests. Are you really sure about this? This isn't how weddings are supposed to be. I wanted to tell her that I didn't care what she thought. That this was my life, not hers. But I didn't. I just smiled and nodded. The months after the wedding were filled with awkward silences at family gatherings. Christmas was the worst. How's married life? Mark asked, his voice thin with the kind of forced politeness that only family can master. Great, I said, trying to sound upbeat. But something about his expression told me he didn't believe me. He was always the one who followed the rules, the one who did everything by the book. To him, my life was an open rebellion against everything he had worked for. He didn't like it. Yeah, we saw your wedding pictures, Rebecca chimed in, flipping her hair over her shoulder. It was cute. Her eyes flickered between my mom and me, and for a second, I felt like I was the butt of some private joke. Chris, bless him, had tried to keep the peace. He'd even made a few attempts to reach out to my family, to get them to see that our life wasn't about status, about keeping up with the Joneses. But they didn't want to hear it. They wanted to keep up appearances. And I couldn't, for the life of me, figure out why. Then came the vineyard. I'd been working hard on expanding my little piece of Napa Valley, turning it into something more. The land next door had been for sale for years, and after a lot of thought, Chris and I decided to take the plunge and buy it. It wasn't a decision we made lightly. The vineyard would require a lot of time, a lot of money, and a whole lot of work. But we were ready. When I told my family, I expected them to be happy for us. After all, we were making a big move. But when I mentioned the cost of the vineyard, the familiar sneer from my mother returned. "You're buying another vineyard?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. "How much are you spending on that? You do realize you could have put that money into something more practical." Mark, of course, had a field day. "A vineyard, Liv? Really? You know, if you weren't so focused on buying things to show off, maybe you could have put that money into something that actually matters." But the worst part came when Chris jokingly asked, "Should we invite the budget experts?" It was a playful jab at my family's constant critiques of our financial decisions, but it cut deeper than I wanted to admit. It's been a month since we bought the vineyard, and things haven't gotten better with my family. At a recent dinner, my father went on a rant about how ridiculous it was that I couldn't just make a real investment. I realized, finally, that they weren't just criticizing my wedding or my vineyard. They were criticizing my life choices, my independence, my desire to carve out something meaningful for myself. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. About how my family will never truly understand me. They'll never get why I didn't want to play by their rules. They'll never see the beauty in the life Chris and I are building. And that's hard to accept. It's hard to accept that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally are the ones who seem to take the most pleasure in pointing out my flaws. I'm still trying to figure out where to go from here. How do you move forward when the people closest to you can't, or won't, understand your choices? How do you maintain a relationship with people who make you feel small for being yourself? I don't have all the answers yet, but I know one thing for sure: I'm not going to keep letting them control how I live my life. I'm curious, Reddit. Have any of you had similar experiences with your family? How do you handle it when they don't understand your choices, especially when it comes to big life decisions like relationships and career moves? Should I keep trying to make peace with them, or is it time to stop bending over backward to gain their approval? The more I reflected on it, the more I realized just how much my family's opinions had shaped my life, whether I wanted them to or not. Growing up in a house where success was measured by how much you could show off and how well you could climb the social ladder, I was always the one who didn't fit in. I didn't care about designer brands, about mingling with the right people, about flaunting wealth for the sake of validation. I was the quiet one, the one who found comfort in books and nature rather than extravagant parties or charity galas. But it wasn't just about the superficial things. It was the constant underlying pressure to conform. I'd spent most of my adult life trying to follow the script they wrote for me: get married, have kids, work a steady job in a respectable field, and so on. But somewhere along the way, I had stopped following the script. When I divorced Richard, it felt like I was stepping off the well-trodden path. And honestly, I was terrified. I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew I couldn't keep going in the same direction. That's when the vineyard idea started. It was always a small dream, something I didn't think I would ever be able to achieve. But after the divorce, after realizing how much I had neglected my own desires for the sake of others, I decided to pursue it. It felt right. And in a weird way, it became a symbol of my independence, my decision to live for myself, not for anyone else. Chris was the one who believed in me. He never pushed me into anything, never made me feel like I had to fit into some mold. He accepted the decisions I made, even if they were unconventional, and he stood by me. I'd never felt that before, not with Richard, not with my family. With Chris, it was different. He encouraged me to invest in the vineyard. "You've worked so hard for this, Liv," he'd said, "and you deserve to see it flourish." It was strange, though. As I poured my energy into the vineyard, I couldn't help but notice how it seemed to separate me further from my family. When I bought the new land, I had hoped that they would see it as a positive step, something that showed I was capable, that I was taking control of my own destiny. But their reaction was far from what I expected. It's not just that they didn't approve, they were actively dismissive. They couldn't fathom that I had the audacity to buy a vineyard in Napa, as if it were some frivolous, unearned splurge. I could tell by the way my mother raised her eyebrows when I mentioned it that she was thinking about how much I was wasting on something that didn't fit into her definition of success. "Why don't you focus on something with a guaranteed return?" she'd said, like I was some naive child who didn't understand the risks involved in a venture like this. My father was no better. "You've never been a risk-taker, Olivia," he said one evening as we sat in the same living room where I'd spent so many holidays growing up. "And now you're going to throw everything away for something that's not even guaranteed? You don't have the experience, and you're certainly not ready for what it takes." His words stung. They stung because I realized that in their eyes, I was still the little girl who needed their guidance. They couldn't accept that I was an adult, that I had my own life, my own ideas, my own plans. I'd had enough of it. But then came Chris's joke. "Should we invite the budget experts?" He meant it lightly, of course. He wasn't attacking my family directly, he was just making a joke out of the ridiculousness of their criticism. But that one little line hit me harder than I'd like to admit. For a moment, I felt like I was still stuck in that place where I couldn't break free from the expectations they had for me. But then I reminded myself, I don't need their approval. I had spent so long seeking their validation, trying to meet their standards. And all it did was make me feel small. It took me a long time to realize that their way of thinking was not my way of thinking. Their idea of success was not my idea of success. The vineyard had become more than just a business to me. It had become a symbol of freedom, a way to break away from the life they expected me to lead. And now, I had to decide, was I willing to continue letting them drag me down with their constant critiques, or was I finally going to live my life on my own terms, regardless of what they thought? Things had only become more complicated after that. The holidays that followed felt awkward, especially with Thanksgiving just around the corner. The last time I saw them was at a family dinner, a tradition that my parents insisted on hosting every year. I could feel the weight of their disapproval hanging in the air as soon as I stepped inside their house. Mark, as usual, was the first to ask about the vineyard. His voice was casual, but I could tell he was holding back a lot of judgment. "How's the new place?" he asked, leaning back in his chair with that smug smile of his. "Is it working out, or are you going to have to sell it off for a loss?" I could have answered defensively. I could have told him that, yes, it was working out, that it was growing steadily, that it was something I was proud of. But instead, I just nodded, offering a simple, "It's going well." My father, sitting across the table, chimed in. "I still think it's a terrible idea," he said, his voice gruff. "You're wasting time and money, Olivia. You should be focusing on something that will actually give you a future." I felt my stomach tighten at his words, the familiar sting of his disappointment sinking in. It's like I could hear every unspoken criticism: "You're not smart enough to handle this, you'll fail eventually, you're not living up to your potential." And I realized, finally, that no matter what I did, no matter how successful I became, it would never be enough for them. I couldn't stand it anymore. As the dinner continued, I found myself withdrawing. I didn't want to listen to their criticisms anymore. I didn't want to pretend like it didn't bother me. And I certainly didn't want to be the same person I was when I had married Richard, when I had spent years chasing after approval, at the cost of my own happiness. I glanced at Chris, who was sitting next to me, his hand resting on my knee. He looked at me with that quiet, understanding expression, as if he knew exactly what I was feeling. He didn't say anything, he didn't have to. It was in that moment that I realized something crucial: I was done. Done trying to earn their approval. Done trying to fit into a mold that wasn't mine. Done letting their judgment dictate my worth. But what came next? How do you rebuild a relationship with family when they don't understand who you've become, when they don't respect the choices you've made? And how do you protect yourself from the constant barrage of negativity that comes from people who are supposed to love you? I'm at a crossroads now. Part of me wants to tell them exactly how I feel, to lay it all out on the table, to explain that I'm done trying to please them. But then another part of me hesitates. What if that only makes things worse? What if, in trying to stand up for myself, I end up alienating them even more? I'm not sure what to do. I've spent so many years trying to play the part they wanted me to play. But now, I'm finally starting to realize that I don't owe them anything. At the same time, I don't want to cut them off completely. They are my family, after all. But how much longer can I let their judgment rule my life? How do you find a balance between maintaining those connections and preserving your own happiness? I guess I'm still figuring that out. But I'm learning that it's okay to let go of the need for approval. It's okay to live for myself, and to let my choices define who I am. So, Reddit, how do you balance your family's expectations with your own? How do you handle situations where their opinions are constantly dragging you down? How do you protect your mental health while still trying to maintain a relationship with people who don't understand you? I'd really love to hear your thoughts. As the months passed, I found myself wrestling with a growing sense of disillusionment when it came to my family. Despite my attempts to remain calm and understanding, the constant judgments, criticisms, and backhanded comments from them started to wear me down. I began to realize that, no matter how much I achieved or how successful my vineyard became, it would never be enough for them. It wasn't just about the wedding anymore, it was about my entire life, my choices, my happiness. The harder I tried to please them, the more they seemed to resent my independence. I had reached a tipping point. It wasn't just the comments anymore. It was how they acted around me. At Christmas, when Chris and I had invited my family over for dinner at the vineyard, I had hoped that they might, at the very least, try to make an effort. Maybe they would see that the vineyard was my dream come to life and that I was finally in a place where I felt good about myself. But no. They came, as expected, with a sense of entitlement. My mother, as usual, criticized everything, from the decor to the way we handled the business. Mark, in his usual smug way, asked me when I was planning to sell the vineyard to real investors. Chris, ever the patient one, smiled and made small talk. But I could feel the tension building. I wanted to scream at them, tell them exactly how their words made me feel, but I knew that would only make things worse. Instead, I stayed calm, as I always had, and tried to enjoy the evening. I even made sure to pour them generous glasses of wine from the best barrel on the property. It was my way of saying, "This is mine. This is what I've built." But the moment that shattered everything came when we were sitting down for dinner, and my father made another comment about how I was wasting my time and taking unnecessary risks. It was a joke to him. Another casual dismissal of everything I had worked for. It was the final straw. I stood up. "You know what, Dad? I'm really tired of hearing how you think I'm wasting my time." My voice was firm, surprisingly steady. His face tightened, the way it always did when I challenged him, but I couldn't back down anymore. "You don't get it, do you?" I continued, my heart pounding in my chest. "You and Mom have spent my entire life trying to mold me into someone I'm not. You've never seen me for who I really am, and frankly, I'm done trying to prove anything to you." There was a stunned silence around the table. I could see Mark shifting uncomfortably in his seat, Rebecca glancing at her phone like she was hoping this wasn't happening. I took a deep breath. I'm proud of what I built. Chris and I are building something real, something that matters to us. And I'm not going to sit here and let you belittle everything I've worked for just because it doesn't fit your definition of success. So if you can't respect that, then I guess we don't have anything else to talk about. The words hung in the air for a moment. It was as if the room collectively held its breath. My father's jaw clenched. "Olivia, you're being ridiculous," he muttered, the tone of his voice cold. I shook my head. "No, Dad. I'm finally being real." There was nothing more to say. For the first time in years, I felt like I had finally stood up for myself. I hadn't backed down. I hadn't let them belittle me. And honestly, it felt damn good. Over the following weeks, I didn't hear much from my family. No calls, no texts, no attempts to reconcile. Part of me expected them to try and smooth things over, but deep down, I knew that wasn't going to happen. My father and Mark had always been about control, about maintaining the status quo, and now that I had broken away, they didn't know how to handle it. And then came the surprise. It started as an innocuous message from Mark. I hadn't heard from him since the dinner, and I didn't expect to. But there it was, a simple text: "We need to talk." I sat on it for a day, wondering if it was a trap or if he was genuinely trying to bridge the gap. After a lot of thought, I decided to meet him. No expectations, just a conversation. He'd always been the perfect one in my family, the one who never made waves, who always had the answers. So, maybe, just maybe, he was trying to make amends. We met at a coffee shop, and to my surprise, Mark wasn't the smug, judgmental figure I had seen so many times before. He looked tired, almost defeated. "Olivia, I didn't understand," he said quietly, looking down at his coffee. "I'm sorry. I should have been more supportive. You've always done things differently, and I didn't see that. I've been caught up in this idea of what you should be, instead of accepting you for who you are." For a moment, I was speechless. This wasn't the Mark I knew, the one who always knew exactly what to say, the one who had always put me down with a smile. But here he was, admitting that he had been wrong. "I've been hard on you, Liv. And I get it now. You've been doing your own thing, and I see that it's working. I'm sorry for how I treated you." There was something sincere in his voice, something I hadn't expected. I wanted to hate him for everything he had put me through, but I couldn't. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when my family finally recognized my worth. "I appreciate that," I said, my voice softer than I had intended. "But it's not just about the vineyard, Mark. It's about respect. It's about you all accepting me for who I am, not who you want me to be." He nodded, looking genuinely remorseful. "I'll do better. I want us to be a family again. I don't want to keep pushing you away." It was a strange feeling. I wanted to believe him, but part of me remained cautious. Maybe I had been waiting for this kind of apology for too long, hoping that somehow things would magically get better. But for once, I didn't need their approval. I had moved beyond needing their validation. And that realization was more empowering than anything they could ever offer. Over the next few months, things slowly started to change with my family. There were no huge gestures, no dramatic reconciliations, but the tension that had been between us started to lift. Mark and I began to rebuild our relationship, step by step. My father, though still stubborn, at least made an effort not to undermine me as much. And as for my mother? Well, she still had a hard time with my choices, but she had started to come around. She still didn't quite understand why I didn't care about living up to their expectations, but at least she was trying. And that was enough for me. But the real victory? It came when I saw the vineyard flourish. Our first harvest was beyond anything I could have hoped for, and the success was undeniable. I began receiving offers from larger wineries who wanted to buy into the business, but I wasn't interested in selling. I wanted this to be my thing, my legacy. I felt proud, not just of the vineyard, but of myself. For the first time, I was living authentically, and no one, not even my family, could take that away from me. My family still didn't fully understand me, and I knew they might never will. But the difference now was that I no longer cared. I had finally learned to live for myself.